There are murders, and then there are messages. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a woman named Betty Bersinger was pushing her stroller through a vacant lot on Norton Avenue in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. She thought she saw a broken mannequin lying in the weeds, pale, cut in half, no blood. She stepped closer. It wasn't a mannequin. It was the body of a young woman, cleanly severed at the waist, arms raised above her head, legs spread apart. Her mouth sliced open in both directions, grotesquely widened into a Glasgow smile. There was no blood on the ground, no sign of struggle, just silence. It looked posed. She ran. She found a phone. She called the police. When the officers arrived, they didn't just see a murder. They saw something else, something cold, calculated. The body had been washed, the limbs arranged, the cuts, surgical. There was a sense that this wasn't just killing. It was theater, and someone had directed it carefully. Within hours, reporters flooded the area, cameras clicked, neighbors whispered. The press would later call her the Black Dahlia, a name that would outlive the girl herself. Her name, before all that, was Elizabeth Short. She was just 22. By the way, if you're listening to this story in the middle of the night, or lying in a dark room, or somewhere on your way home, leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so every time I tell a new story, you'll be the first to hear it, in the right place, at the right time. The coroner arrived. The press followed. And slowly, methodically, the first pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. The body had been drained of blood. No fingerprints. The skin scrubbed. Rope marks on her wrists, her ankles, her neck. Cuts to the flesh. Sharp, practiced. She had been tortured. Her body had been bisected with precision. Between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, a procedure few could perform without formal training. The medical examiner would later say it looked like the work of a surgeon. And then, one of the strangest details. There was a tattoo on her thigh, removed. The patch of skin sliced off and inserted into her rectum. Why? A message? A signature? Or just cruelty? Across town, Elizabeth's fingerprints, taken from a prior arrest, were run through the FBI. Hours later, they had a match. She had been arrested once for underage drinking. That's how they knew who she was. Elizabeth Short, a drifter, a dreamer, a woman looking for something more in the worst place to find it, Los Angeles. The police called her mother in Boston. They told her Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. They wanted to get background information before revealing the truth. Only after the interview did they tell her. Her daughter was dead, brutally murdered. And so, the case began. The crime scene, the press frenzy, the mutilation, all of it swirled together into something bigger than just a killing. It became a symbol of Hollywood's darkness, of American hunger, of unsolved horror, and it was only the beginning. As the city watched, the Black Dahlia became a myth. But myths are born from facts, and the facts, what little there were, would lead down a path of rumors, suspects, lies, and obsession. Elizabeth had been seen days before, alive, drifting through bars, hotel lobbies, diners, always looking for someone, always running from something. Men remembered her. Women noticed her. Some pitied her. Some envied her. She was a pretty face in a city full of them, yet somehow unforgettable. In the hours after her body was found, the coroner and police began building their timeline. Time of death was placed somewhere between the night of January 14th and the early hours of the 15th. But where she had been killed was not where she was found. This was a secondary scene. She had been murdered somewhere else, kept, likely tortured, then cleaned, drained, transported, and displayed. That level of effort takes time, tools, privacy, control. It narrowed the killer pool, not to a random lunatic, but to someone who knew what they were doing, someone comfortable with death, someone methodical. But the problem was, Los Angeles in 1947 was filled with people just like that. War veterans with dark skills, doctors with darker secrets, failed actors, lonely men, angry lovers. Elizabeth had crossed paths with many, some briefly, some fatally. Her story would unfold not in a straight line, but in echoes, rumors, sightings, old letters, half-truths. The press would twist it, the public would eat it, and the police, they would drown in it. But for now, the girl with the carved smile, the cut spine, the cold stare, lay silent, waiting to be known, waiting to be understood, waiting to be solved. Elizabeth Short wasn't from Los Angeles. She was born in Hyde Park, Massachusetts in 1924. Her father abandoned the family during the Great Depression, leaving behind a suicide note and disappearing. Elizabeth was 6. For years they believed he was dead, until one day he sent a letter. He was alive, living in California. That betrayal was the first wound. As a teenager, Elizabeth suffered from bronchitis and asthma. Her lungs were weak. Doctors suggested she move to a warmer climate, so she went to Florida, then Massachusetts again, then California. She moved like a ghost, never quite settling, always drawn to the edges of glamour. Friends described her as soft-spoken, gentle, hopeful. She wanted to be an actress. Like thousands of other girls, she thought Hollywood might notice her if she was pretty enough, mysterious enough, available enough. But beneath the surface, there was something fragile, a sadness that lingered behind her smile. Something people didn't quite understand until it was too late. In Los Angeles, Elizabeth lived off the kindness of others. She dated soldiers, slept on couches, borrowed lipstick, stories, and time. She was always dressed up, always on her way somewhere, but nowhere she went ever seemed to be her destination. She told people she had been engaged once, to a pilot who died in the war. The story changed, depending on who asked. Some believed her, some didn't. Maybe it was true. Maybe it was just a softer version of the loneliness she couldn't explain. Men were drawn to her. Some said she flirted easily. Others said she was cold. She had a habit of making promises she didn't keep. Or maybe she never made them at all. People just thought she had. By the fall of 1946, Elizabeth had become part of the background noise of Hollywood. Just another girl with a dream and nowhere to sleep. In December, she traveled to San Diego with a man named Robert "Red" Manley, a traveling salesman who said he felt sorry for her. He described her as pleasant, kind, never flirtatious. They shared a hotel room, but he insisted they didn't sleep together. He later said he drove her back to Los Angeles on January 9th, dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel, and never saw her again. That was the last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short, alive. Hotel staff remembered her waiting in the lobby. She was supposed to meet her sister. The phones didn't ring. She left. Where she went after that, no one knows for sure. Some witnesses claimed they saw her in a bar that night. Others said she had been with a man, a woman, alone, with friends, with strangers. The stories multiplied. Some were lies, some were confusion, and some were true, but led nowhere. What mattered was this: between the 9th and the 15th she vanished, 6 full days, and then she was found in a vacant lot, mutilated, bisected, posed. Investigators tried to reconstruct her movements. They interviewed hundreds of people, pulled hotel records, searched boarding houses, train stations, bus stops. They built a map of shadows, places she might have been, people she might have met. But there was no anchor, no fixed point. She was always moving, always almost seen, always slipping through the cracks. As the days passed, the newspapers turned Elizabeth Short into something else: the Black Dahlia. The name came from a movie at the time, The Blue Dahlia. But they called her Black because of the clothes she wore. Black dresses, black shoes, black curls. She was glamorous in death, and the public couldn't get enough. They printed every detail, every rumor. They wrote about her lovers, her wild lifestyle. They speculated on jealousy, revenge, drugs, sadomasochism, secret affairs. None of it was confirmed. Most of it wasn't true. But facts didn't matter anymore. She had become a symbol of danger, of fallen beauty, of what happened to women who wanted too much. The police, overwhelmed, frustrated, angry, lashed out at the press. But privately, they knew the case was slipping. Elizabeth's background had no clear enemies. No jealous ex-boyfriend with a motive, no money, no power, no scandal. Just a life that drifted into the wrong orbit. The city coroner, Dr. Frederick Newbar, issued a detailed report. She had been tied up, tortured, her face mutilated after death. There was trauma to her skull, but that wasn't the cause of death. She had died from hemorrhaging, blood loss from the cuts on her face and body. Her body had been drained, cleaned. The killer had taken their time. It wasn't a crime of passion, it was a crime of control, and that made it worse. The LAPD assigned their best detectives, among them Detective Harry Hansen, a seasoned man, calm, persistent. He believed in method, in patience, but even he admitted this case was different. It was too clean, too precise. It felt professional, and yet it was chaotic, because every time they got close, every time a lead surfaced, it unraveled. Red Manley passed 2 polygraphs. He had no motive, no opportunity. Other boyfriends were questioned, cleared. Theories formed and collapsed. But behind it all, Elizabeth's story remained. A young woman who came west looking for light, and instead found a darkness she could never escape. The field on Norton Avenue held more than just a body. It held intention. From the moment police studied the scene, they realized this was not where Elizabeth Short had been killed. There was no blood, not a drop in the dirt. That meant she had been murdered elsewhere, then transported, staged, and left, on display. The way her body was posed spoke volumes. Her arms were raised above her head in a surrender-like position. Her legs spread, her mouth, slashed from corner to corner, grotesquely widened like a permanent scream. Someone had taken time. The body had been cut cleanly in half using what the coroner described as a hemicorporectomy, a surgical technique known primarily to medical professionals. It required detailed knowledge of anatomy, and it had been done expertly. There were no jagged edges, no trial and error. This was not a clumsy crime. The flesh had been cut with purpose. More chilling still, her body had been scrubbed. With gasoline, they believed. To remove prints, DNA, fibers, her intestines had been tucked beneath her torso. Her face, deliberately mutilated. The cuts were not random. They were designed to send a message. But to whom? And why? Detectives scoured the nearby area. They found a bloody sack in an alley a few blocks away, possibly used to carry the body. They found a heel print on the ground, but no weapon, no fingerprints, no tire marks. The killer had come and gone without trace. The autopsy deepened the mystery. There were ligature marks on Elizabeth's wrists, ankles, and neck. She had been tied down, possibly for days. Her pubic hair had been removed. There was bruising to her body, and her cause of death, officially, was hemorrhage from facial lacerations, with head trauma as a secondary factor. The coroner's words were grim. Her body was completely drained of blood. Not spilled. Drained. Which meant time, tools, and control. The killer didn't panic. They weren't interrupted. They finished what they came to do. LAPD detectives believed the killer had medical training, or at the very least, experience with dissection. That theory led them to begin quietly checking area hospitals, medical students, surgeons, veterans with field surgery experience, nothing conclusive. Then, on January 24th, 9 days after the discovery, an envelope was mailed to the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper. It was addressed using letters cut from magazines. Inside were Elizabeth's personal belongings, her birth certificate, business cards, photos, names scribbled on paper, and a note. "Here is Dahlia's belongings," it read. The contents were soaked in gasoline to remove fingerprints. Only one partial print could be lifted from the envelope. It led nowhere. The killer was watching, listening, reading the news, playing with the city. 3 days later, another letter arrived. "Turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger." The police waited. No one came. The killer had taunted them and then vanished again. The press fed the fire. Front pages screamed with headlines. Theories swirled. The public, hungry for answers, obsessed over every grim detail. Letters continued arriving. Some were hoaxes. Some, maybe not. But the original killer never identified themselves again. Investigators began looking for deeper meaning in the scene. Why Limert Park? It wasn't random. It was a quiet, mostly undeveloped area in 1947. Open space, little foot traffic. It gave the killer time, privacy. The bisecting of the body was rare, practically unheard of in murder cases, which raised a theory. The killer wanted the world to see the work, piece by piece, to reduce Elizabeth Short to parts, a thing, an object. It was a brutal form of dehumanization, but it was also art, in the most disturbing way imaginable. Detectives consulted FBI profiles. Some speculated the killer might be a necrophile, a sadist. Others believed it was personal, a revenge killing. But there was no evidence of sexual assault. Nothing fit neatly, no neat motives, no final confession. The contradictions multiplied. Elizabeth was seen as a party girl, yet had few confirmed sexual relationships. She was portrayed as manipulative, but friends described her as polite, sometimes naive. She was painted as a temptress, but in most of her photos, she looks lost. The deeper they searched, the harder it became to separate the girl from the myth. And in the center of it all was silence. The killer had struck once, and only once. That fact disturbed investigators more than anything, because it suggested purpose. This wasn't a crime of compulsion. It was planned, executed, and never repeated, which meant the killer got what they wanted. The horror wasn't just the act, it was the calm that followed. The killer didn't need to kill again. They had already said everything they wanted to say, through the way Elizabeth Short was found, like a final exhibit. The detectives chased everything. Over 150 suspects were questioned. Dozens were arrested. Every possible lead pursued, from cab drivers to dentists, from vagrants to doctors. But the trail always grew cold, too clean, too precise. The scene on Norton Avenue whispered the same thing, again and again. Someone planned this, and they were very, very good at it. On January 24th, 1947, something changed. Up until that point, the Black Dahlia case was a brutal mystery. But then, the killer wrote back. The letter arrived at the Los Angeles Examiner office in a plain white envelope. It was postmarked downtown L.A. The writing was a collage, words and letters cut from magazines and newspapers. Inside, detectives found some of Elizabeth Short's belongings: her social security card, birth certificate, photos, a little black address book. Each item confirmed authenticity. These weren't copies, they were hers. The envelope had been cleaned with gasoline, just like her body. Any fingerprints that might have been there were gone, except one, a smudged partial print. It was lifted. It led nowhere. Then came more letters. Another message arrived a few days later. Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger. Detectives waited. Wednesday came. 10 a.m. passed. No one turned themselves in. Whoever wrote it was playing. After that, the letters came in waves. Some were typed, others handwritten, all taunting. Some claimed responsibility. Others offered false confessions. But none could be traced back to the original sender. A few letters contained details only the killer could have known. Most were hoaxes. The LAPD formed a special task force. A team of over 20 detectives worked full-time on the case. Hundreds of leads poured in, tips from the public, theories from reporters, names scribbled on diner napkins. One lead said a man had confessed in a bar. Another claimed a woman had overheard something in a hotel lobby. Police chased all of them. Nothing stuck. One of the strangest moments came when Elizabeth's little black book, found in the envelope, was analyzed. It held over 70 names, men, contacts, acquaintances. Most were lovers or people she met on the street. The book painted a picture of a woman who lived on the margins, always meeting someone new, always looking for someone to stay. Police began calling every name. They questioned everyone. Some were startled, some lied, a few disappeared, none were charged. The case flooded the news. The Examiner, the Herald, the Times. Each paper printed different versions of Elizabeth's life. In one, she was a seductress. In another, a broken girl. The press didn't just report the case, they became part of it. And the killer knew that. They had, after all, mailed her belongings to the press, not the police. It was calculated. It meant something. Detective Harry Hansen, still leading the investigation, started looking closer at anyone with media connections. Film editors, writers, publicists, even studio doctors. The theory? Someone who knew how to manipulate attention. One of the first high-profile suspects was Mark Hansen, no relation to the detective. He owned the Florentine Gardens nightclub, where Elizabeth had often gone. She had stayed at his home a few times. According to some accounts, he had made advances toward her. She turned him down. He was wealthy, well-connected, and he knew people in the press. He was questioned multiple times. He denied everything. Police never found physical evidence linking him to the murder. He faded from suspicion. Then came Robert Red Manley, the last known person to see Elizabeth alive. He was a married man. He had driven her from San Diego back to LA, spent the night in a hotel, dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th. He was interrogated, passed 2 lie detector tests. He had no known motive, no history of violence. He seemed scared, cooperative. His story never changed. He was cleared. For a moment, attention shifted to Leslie Dillon, a bellhop and aspiring writer with a fascination for crime. He had written a letter to LAPD psychiatrist Dr. J. Paul DeRiver, suggesting a theory. The killer might be someone named Jeff Connors. Dillon described the crime with eerie detail, too much detail. Police brought him in, interrogated him in a hotel room under false pretenses, holding him without formal charges. They believed Jeff Connors was a fabrication, a smokescreen. Dillon, they thought, was describing himself. But after weeks of pressure, the case against him collapsed. No evidence, no confession. Another dead end. The list of suspects continued to grow. One man, Walter Bailey, was a surgeon who lived near where the body was found. He had once treated a member of Elizabeth's family. He had a breakdown after the murder, seemed unstable, died in 1948. Another was Patrick S. O'Reilly, a physician with ties to Hollywood and a record of sexual violence. Dozens of others followed. Each time the press swarmed. The public speculated, but nothing held. The truth was simple and maddening. The case had too many clues, too many people, too many masks, and not a single confession that could be proved. The LAPD's evidence room filled with boxes, photos, letters, maps, testimonies, timelines. But none of it pointed, with certainty, to one man or woman. Just pieces, fragments, a puzzle with its center missing, and the killer, whoever they were, was silent now. The game was over, the stage had been cleared, and Elizabeth Short's body still haunted the city. By February 1947, the LAPD had hit a wall. The case was still open, but momentum was dying. There were too many suspects, too many theories, and none of them held. But one pattern did emerge: doctors, surgeons, men with sharp tools and quiet lives. Investigators began looking at medical professionals, especially those with a dark edge: disciplinary history, psychological instability, a taste for control. One name floated to the surface: George Hodel, a physician, socialite, art collector. He had lived in the famous Sowden House in Hollywood, a building that looked like a temple carved from stone. Inside, there were secret rooms, hidden staircases, and strange gatherings. Hodel was brilliant, educated, eccentric. He hosted parties for LA's elite: bohemians, musicians, actresses, thinkers. Some whispered about drugs, others about sex, and some about violence. In 1949, 2 years after the murder, his own daughter accused him of molestation. During the trial, she also suggested he might be involved in the Black Dahlia case. The LAPD took it seriously. They placed George Hodel under surveillance. For weeks, they bugged his home, planted microphones, tapped his phone. One recording stood out. A male voice, believed to be Hodel, was heard saying, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead." That secretary indeed had died, under mysterious circumstances. The tapes were chilling, but vague. No direct confession, no hard evidence. And so, the LAPD let him go. Hodel left for Asia, spent years abroad, eventually returned, died in 1999. The case went cold until 2003. George Hodel's son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective himself, published a book, Black Dahlia Avenger. In it, Steve laid out a comprehensive theory. His father was the killer. He matched George's handwriting to the taunting letters. He dug up family photos of a woman who resembled Elizabeth Short. He pointed to the medical knowledge, the location of the house, the timeline. It was compelling, but controversial. Some called it obsession, others, a son's need to explain a monstrous father. But Steve didn't stop. He continued publishing, connecting other unsolved murders in LA to his father. The Zodiac case, the Chicago lipstick murders, dozens. None were ever proven. Still, his theory became one of the most talked about in the Black Dahlia lore. But George Hodel was not the only suspect. There were others. Jack Anderson Wilson, a small-time criminal and arsonist, allegedly confessed while drunk. But before police could interview him properly, he died in a fire, one he may have set himself. Arnold Smith, a convict with medical training, bragged about the murder in prison, but investigators dismissed him as an attention seeker. Dr. Patrick O'Reilly, the physician with a criminal record, had no alibi, but no evidence either. So many names, so many motives. Yet none answered the central question: why? Why Elizabeth Short? She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, she didn't threaten anyone, unless, of course, she knew something. Or someone. The theory of a personal connection gained traction, that she might have been killed not because of who she was, but because of what she saw, or said, or became: a threat, a liability, or maybe an opportunity. In a city built on performance, someone may have chosen her for the stage, a twisted display, a human canvas, a crime to be remembered, because the Black Dahlia wasn't buried in silence. She became legend. Her face was everywhere. Her story, repeated, twisted, devoured. Movies were made. Books were written. Conspiracies flourished. The idea of her death became bigger than her life, and the killer, whoever they were, had achieved something rare. They vanished. Vanished so completely that no confession could be believed, no suspect could be trusted, no theory could close the door. The case was reopened in the 1970s, again in the 1990s, and again in the 2000s. Each time, new evidence surfaced. Leads were chased. DNA was tested. Each time, nothing definitive. The Los Angeles District Attorney's files, once sealed, were opened decades later. Inside, memos revealed internal suspicions, informants, surveillance, theories. One memo even stated, "We believe the murderer is George Hodel." But belief is not proof. The case remains officially unsolved. No charges, no closure, just a photograph of a young woman, wide-eyed, hopeful, standing beside a mural in Hollywood. And then, the photo from the morgue, bisected, mutilated, frozen in time, a before and after, a promise and a punishment. In all the years since, the most disturbing realization isn't how she died. It's how easy it was to forget who she really was. Time didn't bury the Black Dahlia, it amplified her. As the decades passed, the murder of Elizabeth Short became more than a cold case. It became a mirror, held up to a city that thrives on shadows, a story too dark to be fiction, too unresolved to be forgotten. Los Angeles changed, the streets, the buildings, the people, but the lot on Norton Avenue remained etched into memory, even long after it had been built over. You can't walk past that corner without knowing something once happened there, something that still lingers. In the years following the murder, theories never stopped. Writers, filmmakers, historians, all tried to fill in the blanks. The Black Dahlia became a genre, a puzzle, a cultural obsession. Her face, with the wide smile and dark curls, reappeared in film noir posters, novels, crime anthologies. She became iconic for how she was found, not who she was. But justice, real justice, stayed distant. The LAPD quietly stopped investigating sometime in the 1950s. The evidence sat in archives. Some was lost, some misplaced, some rumored destroyed. Yet every so often someone new would come forward, a confession, a theory, a clue. Most led nowhere. Some sounded plausible, and a few, like the theory from her former neighbor, suggested the killer had been hiding in plain sight all along. In the 2010s, digital sleuths and internet forums reignited interest. DNA analysis improved. A few investigators pushed to test items from the original crime scene, her belongings, the envelope, the stamp, the partial print. But the trail was too cold. The chain of custody, too broken. Even DNA, powerful as it is, needs something to compare to. And the killer? Long gone. Maybe dead. Maybe not. In 2013, the FBI released previously classified files, not just on Elizabeth Short, but on suspects, leads, surveillance operations. It showed how seriously the case had been taken, and how quickly it had unraveled under pressure. In all that data, no answer. Just shadows. Some believe the crime was committed by someone powerful, protected by influence, money, or fear. Others think it was a one-time act of madness, committed by a nobody, a man who simply disappeared. But what if it wasn't about who? What if it was about why? Why this woman? Why that pose? Why the silence afterward? Elizabeth Short had dreams. That much we know. She wanted to be in the movies, or near them, or admired by the people who made them. She drifted through Hollywood's orbit, never quite landing, never quite leaving. Some say she was naive. Others say she played with fire. The truth, as always, is quieter. She was alone. She trusted easily. She believed in something better, and she paid for that belief with her life. If there's a meaning in the brutality, it lies in that gap, between her hope and her end, between what she wanted and what she became. The Black Dahlia wasn't just a murder, it was a message, but no one ever found the right translation. All we're left with is a story, broken, echoing, incomplete. A young woman's body, cut in half. A city that never looked at itself the same way again. The killer was never caught. There is no face to blame, no name to curse, no moment of justice, only questions. Who could do something like that? How did they hide? And why did the world move on so easily? That's the part that haunts me, because cases don't always end with handcuffs. Sometimes they end with silence, and that silence lasts for decades. Somewhere, the person who killed Elizabeth Short may have looked at her photo again, read the headlines, listened to the theories, and smiled, knowing they had done something unforgettable, something the world couldn't stop talking about, and something no one could ever prove. Some crimes are never solved. They don't end in a courtroom. They don't fade into archives. They echo across generations, cities, and myths. The murder of Elizabeth Short was one of those crimes. It was never just about death. It was about control, about performance, about fear. Someone took a lonely, hopeful girl and turned her into a message, one that no one could fully read. In the years that followed, people remembered her wrong. They called her wild, promiscuous, dangerous. They turned her into the villain of her own story, because it made the ending easier to accept. But Elizabeth Short was none of those things. She was human, she was vulnerable, and she was preyed upon by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The truth may still be out there, in an old diary, in a basement box, in the fading memory of someone who once knew too much. But until then, she remains a mystery, a name, a face, a wound in the shape of a girl. And we are left to wonder, did justice ever stand a chance, or was this always meant to be one of those stories where the silence says more than the truth ever could? Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.